Paris is among the strangest cities in the world when it comes to football. The biggest and richest metropolitan area in the EU, Paris and the wider Île-de-France region has produced World Cup winners like Thierry Henry, Kylian Mbappe and N'Golo Kante, overtaking Sao Paulo over the last decade as the most prolific talent factory in all of world football. But despite producing the players that powered France to 2 World Cups, and currently second place in the FIFA World Rankings, Parisian club football has been a tale of remarkable underachievement. Whereas London, which is a similar metropolitan area in terms of wealth, population, and indeed geography to Paris, just 200 miles away or a couple of hours by train, is home to 7 of the 20 current Premier League teams: Arsenal, Brentford, Chelsea, Crystal Palace, Fulham, Tottenham, and West Ham, fostering strong rivalries and able to lay claim to significant histories and successes, along with a handful of other prominent clubs like QPR, Millwall, and Charlton throughout the EFL. Paris, by comparison, and the Île-de-France region as a whole, has just one Ligue 1 club, PSG. The city's other clubs, Paris FC, Red Star, Racing Club, USC, Entente, and FC Versailles have long languished between the 2nd and 6th tiers of French football, playing games in front of tiny crowds in modest stadiums in the shadow of PSG. Even PSG themselves, prior to their takeover by the Qatari state in 2011, were perennial underachievers. Founded in 1970, the same year that their manager Luis Enrique was born, when the Qatari state acquired PSG in 2011, they had only won 2 Ligue 1 titles, and they had only ever won 1 knockout game in the UEFA Champions League. As recently as the 2007-08 season, PSG finished 16th in the Ligue 1 table, just 2 places and 3 points above the relegation zone, and closer to dropping out of the top flight of French football than actually winning it, despite being the division's only Parisian club. Since 2011, PSG have become the undisputed kings of not just Parisian but all of French football, winning 10 out of the last 12 Ligue 1 titles, and well on course to make it 11 out of 13 this season, unbeaten in the league so far this term, and already 10 points clear of second place Marseille. As I covered in a recent video, PSG's economic might has eroded any sense of competition in Ligue 1. They outspend the league's next highest spending club by over 400%, the Ligue 1 average by over 1,000%, and the division's lowest spending club by nearly 4,000%. But could all of that, PSG's relentless dominance, Paris's status as a one-club city, and French football's lack of sporting or economic competition all be about to change due to this man, Bernard Arnault, the 5th richest person in the world, and his family's acquisition of Ligue 2 promotion candidates Paris FC, with additional investments and expertise from Red Bull, as well as 1 or 2 familiar faces from the world of football? Well, as you have probably gathered by this stage, that is what today's video is all about. So sit back, relax, and join me, once again, on a journey to the City of Love, the birthplace of Voltaire, and the site of probably the best cookie that I've ever had. Honestly, I don't do brand deals on this channel because I'm just so bloody principled, unlike all of the other shysters on football YouTube, eh? But if these cookie connoisseurs want to get in touch with me, I might be willing to forego my principles. As we take a look at the club which now has the richest non-state owners in all of world football, their aims and ambitions, and what all of this means for the landscape of French, and indeed, European football. Paris may be an anomaly in the context of capitals of major European footballing nations, even Berlin, infamous underachievers, with a metropolitan area less than half the size of Paris, has both Union and Hertha, but in France, Paris is the norm. There isn't a single French city with 2 top-flight football clubs, or even 2 well-supported professional teams. Whereas 2 club cities like Manchester, Liverpool, Glasgow, and even Sheffield or Birmingham are the norm in the UK, it has never been the case in France. Football took much longer to become part of the fabric in French society than it did in Britain and in most of Europe. Introduced by the British in the late 1800s, Standard Athletic Club, an English-speaking social club founded by British immigrants living in Paris, won 4 out of the first 5 French championships, and the only other team to win the league during that time, Club Français, also based in Paris, were called Club Français so as to distinguish themselves from the league's dominant British clubs. It is notable, nonetheless, that when the French Championship was founded, with just 6 teams competing in a 3-week-long knockout format, 4 out of the 6 clubs were based in the city of Paris, and all 6 of them in the broader Paris metropolitan area. 130 years on, the 18-team Ligue hasn't had 2 Parisian clubs since the 1978-79 season, and it hasn't had 2 clubs from the Paris metropolitan area since Racing Club's relegation in the 1989-90 campaign. There aren't even 6 clubs from the entire Ile-de-France region in the top 3 tiers of French football now, let alone in the top flight. France's slow uptake to football and match-going culture, Ligue 1's average attendance was still below 10,000 during the 1980s, prevented multiple clubs in single cities from developing significant levels of support. Meanwhile, the close relationship between local administrations and councils with sporting clubs meant that they tended to only want to deal with one club rather than multiple clubs with perhaps competing and conflicting interests. As a result of both of those factors, the early part of French football history, by which I mean about the first 90 years, was defined by a series of mergers of local clubs, eliminating local rivalries and local or regional competition, as we saw and continue to see in, say, England or Germany, in favour of coalition building, growing support, and focusing all of a city's efforts on a single sporting institution. Paris FC, now one of the richest owned clubs in world football, were born in that tradition. Founded in 1969 in an attempt to give Paris a football club worthy of one of the world's great cities, CS Sedan, or RC Paris Sedan as they were then known, were the top team from Paris at the time. They finished 5th in France's top flight during the 1968-69 season, but they had never, and would never, win a top flight league title. Paris FC approached CS Sedan with a merger proposal soon after they were founded, following the model of most French cities, but their proposals were rejected. Red Star were the only other top-flight Parisian club at the time, but owing to their own strong sense of identity, as one of France's oldest clubs, synonymous with anti-fascist activism, left-wing politics, and its working-class roots, they would never have entertained the idea of watering down that identity by merging with anyone else. While football became synonymous with the working man and the working class throughout most of Europe before the start of the 1900s, in France, where football was much less ubiquitous and rugby was the more popular British import, it was associated with well-to-do British migrants and Paris's metropolitan elites. Red Star bucked that trend, however, founded by future FIFA president Jules Rimet as a club of the working class in 1897. Unable to merge them with either CS Sedan or Red Star, Paris FC looked a little bit further down the French Football League pyramid, identifying third-tier Stade Saint-Germain as possible candidates. The 2 clubs successfully merged to create a new club known as Paris Saint-Germain, you may have heard of them, in 1970. The merger was successful in the sense that Paris Saint-Germain enjoyed more success than Stade Saint-Germain ever had, but it was a partnership which wouldn't last long. In 1972, Paris FC pulled out of the merger, owing to the type of tension with a local city administration in France that I mentioned just a moment ago. The mayor of Paris was unwilling to offer the new club any support, because they were then situated in nearby Saint-Germain, just outside of Paris. A bitter split ensued, in which Paris FC retained all of the club's first-team players, their stadium, and their top-flight league status, secured thanks to promotion in 1971. Meanwhile, PSG were administratively relegated to the 3rd tier, retaining only the former club's amateur players. Despite the contrasting fortunes at the time of the split, it would be PSG who had the last laugh, and they wouldn't have to wait long. Just 2 years later, in the 1973-74 season, Paris FC were relegated from France's top flight, along with CS Sedan, with whom they had initially attempted to merge. Meanwhile, PSG won a second successive promotion, returning to the top flight along with Red Star, and they moved into the Parc des Princes as Paris FC moved out. That last shift was actually the most significant, as it meant that PSG were now situated in Paris and would enjoy cooperation with Paris City Council, permanently relegating Paris FC and the city's other clubs to secondary status from which they have never recovered. Since then, PSG have been permanent members of Ligue 1, meanwhile Paris FC have only spent a single season back in the top flight, in 1978-79, when they won promotion, but came straight back down again. Unlike in most other French cities, however, the lack of interruption of PSG's hegemony in Paris hasn't been for the want of trying. During the 1980s, immensely wealthy Parisian industrialist Jean-Luc Lagardère, whose Lagardère Group was among France's largest conglomerates, attempted to merge Paris FC and Racing Club Paris in the hope of creating a club that could rival and one day overtake PSG. Racing Club's management opposed the merger, which saw Paris FC become an amateur club, administratively relegated to the 4th tier and later dropping all the way down to the 5th, while Lagardère bankrolled Racing Club in an effort to turn them into a super club. Lagardère brought the likes of David Ginola, Pierre Lipbarski and Enzo Francescoli to Racing Club, as well as appointing Arthur George, the head coach, who had just won the European Cup with Porto. In trying to run before they could walk though, Racing Club amassed enormous losses, and they were relegated in 1985, finishing bottom of the league in their first season back in the top flight. The following season, PSG won their first ever French championship, further entrenching their dominance of Parisian football. Racing Club did return to what is now Ligue 1 in 1986, and they even finished above PSG in the 1987-88 season, by which stage they had been renamed Matra Racing after Lagardère's Formula 1 team, but they incurred huge debts in order to get there, and following relegation again in 1990, the whole project came crashing down. The landscape of Parisian football has been relatively unchanged since then, with PSG's takeover by the Qatari state in 2011 only serving to drive an even greater wedge between them and the city's other clubs. Red Star, despite their left-wing roots, are somewhat depressingly now owned by 777 partners, the debt and crisis-laden American investment firm, who also own 4 other clubs around the globe, with minority stakes in an additional 2. Meanwhile, the Kingdom of Bahrain, seemingly inspired by the Qataris, acquired a 20% stake in Paris FC in 2020. For the first time in at least 3 decades, though, there is now the possibility of that landscape shifting. Bernard Arnault is the wealthiest individual in Europe and the 5th wealthiest on the planet, ahead of Larry Page, Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, and trailing only America's 4 oligarchical tech entrepreneurs, Musk, Bezos, Zuckerberg and Ellison. Often described as the 2nd richest family in the world, the Arnaults have a net worth of between $175 to $250 billion, depending on which day you check, and stock market fluctuations. It is a fortune which is tied up in LVMH, the world's largest luxury goods company and the most valuable company in Europe. Born into a wealthy family, Arnault began his career working for his father's civil engineering company, convincing him to pivot towards real estate instead. Arnault's love of luxury goods came through his mother, who had a fascination with the French brand Christian Dior, and his work in real estate, which put him in close contact with the 1%. He entered the industry through the acquisition of struggling luxury brand Boussac Son Frère for the ceremonial fee of £1. Arnault proceeded to gut the business, earning himself the nickname the Terminator, laying off over 9,000 of the company's staff, and selling off all of the company's assets, with the exception of the Christian Dior brand and Le Bon Marché department store in Paris. Arnault used the proceeds from all of the cuts that he had made and the assets that he sold to turn Dior's fortunes around. In the late 80s, Arnault partnered with Henri Racamier, the president of Louis Vuitton, and Alain Chevalier, the CEO of Moet Hennessy, to form Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, better known as LVMH. It would turn out to be an unhappy marriage, but while Arnault and Louis Vuitton president Henri Racamier had disagreements regarding how the company should be run, Arnault was busy leveraging all the capital that he could get his hands on to acquire enough LVMH shares and voting rights that no one would be strong enough to oppose him. Between 1987 and 1990, Racamier and Moët Hennessy CEO Alain Chevalier waged open war on Arnault. But as soon as he reached the 35% threshold of voting rights through a series of acquisitions, Arnault removed Racamier from the LVMH board, and he has ruled the company with an iron fist ever since. It is a ruthlessness which is now synonymous with Arnault, who is sometimes referred to as the wolf in Kashmir, owing to his combined love of luxury goods and eating his rivals alive. Through Agache, the Arnault family's holding company, Arnault now privately owns 48% of LVMH and 63% of the company's voting rights. Over the last 40 years, Arnault has continued to expand the LVMH empire through the acquisition of brands like Bulgari, Marc Jacobs, and Tiffany & Co. The company as a whole is now valued at roughly 350 billion euros, putting it virtually neck and neck with the Danish pharmaceutical giants Novo Nordisk, whose value has increased sharply since they brought various weight loss drugs, including Ozempic, to the market, as the most valuable company in Europe. Although Arnault and LVMH are most commonly associated with luxury fashion and jewellery, the family maintains a large real estate empire, along with interests in other luxury industries like yacht building and five-star hotels. Group Arnault, since renamed Agache, even invested in Netflix back in 1999, and more recently in the Chinese tech firm ByteDance, which is the parent company of TikTok. Football is very much uncharted territory for Agache though, and, unusually, it is an investment that wasn't spearheaded by Arnault. In fact, the family patriarch is reported to have very little interest in football and was lukewarm at best about the prospect of buying a club. Arnault's 5 children, though, Delphine, Antoine, Alexander, Frederick, and Jean, all hold senior executive roles within LVMH, and it is Arnault's eldest son, Antoine, who was most keen on the family acquiring Paris FC. Unlike his father, Antoine is a lifelong football fan who grew up supporting PSG but seems to have a near-obsessive affection for Liverpool. Antoine began working for his father's firm in the advertising department at Louis Vuitton, and he has long maintained that athletes and sports are massively undervalued by luxury brands. The 47-year-old led the charge for LVMH to forge closer ties with high-profile athletes, sports teams and competitions, recruiting Zinedine Zidane, Pelé and Diego Maradona as ambassadors at Louis Vuitton. Antoine appears to have won the argument in terms of the value of investing in sport, with LVMH's luxury watch brand Hublot, perhaps most notably, having invested heavily in football, sponsoring UEFA competitions and the Premier League, along with several high-profile players and managers, including Kylian Mbappe, Didier Deschamps, and Jose Mourinho. Fellow LVMH watch brand Tag Heuer is partnered with Cristiano Ronaldo, paying a reported annual $10 million for the privilege. Italian brand Loro Piana are partnered with Juventus, and Louis Vuitton recently penned an endorsement deal with Real Madrid and England's Jude Bellingham. That is to say nothing of LVMH's enormous investment in sports outside of football, including the Paris Olympics, where their branding was absolutely everywhere, partnerships with athletes like Novak Djokovic and Usain Bolt in other sports, and a recent $1 billion 10-year sponsorship deal struck with Formula One. Antoine was also rumoured to have been heavily involved in the viral Louis Vuitton advert on the eve of the 2022 World Cup, which depicted Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo playing chess. Antoine is the vice chairman and CEO of Christian Dior. His father is the chairman, but while he might be the Arnault family member who is most passionate about football and the most heavily involved in the takeover of Paris FC, that doesn't mean that he has any experience or expertise in running a football club, which is something that he was keen to emphasise when representing Agache Sport, a subsidiary of the Agache Group, at a press conference in November. Antoine told reporters, quote, "We know what we can do, but we also know what we can't do." End quote. That is where Red Bull comes in. While the Arnault family are capable of supplying the cash, lots of cash, commercial and branding expertise, Red Bull, who generate 10 billion euros in annual revenue themselves, and whose co-owners are the 42nd and 47th richest people in the world, estimated to be worth a combined 70 billion euros, also have extensive involvement in owning and running football clubs. That started with SV Austria Salzburg, who Red Bull bought and controversially rebranded as Red Bull Salzburg in 2005, and the company now owns the New York Red Bulls in the United States, RB Leipzig in Germany, Red Bull Bragantino in Brazil, and RB Omiya Aradija in Japan, as well as having minority stakes in both Leeds United and now Paris FC. Red Bull's investment in football has been hugely unpopular, especially in Germany, where RB Leipzig's branding and business model is considered a grotesque aberration, but no one can doubt the competence of their executives and appointees. Red Bull-owned teams, as a collective, have not only been immensely successful, they have also been financially sustainable, with a clear identity built around academy development, youth recruitment, and playing a fast and vibrant style of play, which Red Bull considers to be consistent with their brand. That is the same vision that Antoine, and by extension Agache, have for Paris FC, hoping to exploit what is currently the greatest wellspring of talent anywhere in the world. For all of their domestic success, which has been guaranteed by their financial dominance, PSG have often been accused of neglecting the immense talent on their doorstep in favour of flashy and, typically, immensely expensive overseas signings. The likes of Paul Pogba, N'Golo Kante, Riyad Mahrez, Jules Koundé and, initially at least, Kylian Mbappe, were all born in Paris but slipped through PSG's nets. Meanwhile, Kingsley Coman, who scored the only goal of the game for Bayern Munich against PSG in a Champions League final, was one of many talented locals to come through the PSG youth ranks, only to be allowed to depart, in his case, on a free transfer after his contract expired. Paris FC have a current annual budget of just €30 million, compared to over €800 million at PSG. There are no immediate plans, nor would it even be initially possible, to try and close that gap in the short term to any significant extent, but where PSG are foreign-owned, and indeed actually owned by a foreign nation-state, have a foreign manager and coaching team, and their Qatari era has been marked by the arrival of several foreign superstars, whether that be Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Edinson Cavani or Neymar, often at the expense of talented young Parisians. Paris FC see an opportunity to market themselves as a distinctly Parisian brand. French owners, French managers and French players is the name of the game, and hoovering up those talented young players from the many banlieues of Paris is thought to be the mechanism by which Paris FC can become a genuine force in French football. In some ways, it is an entirely logical and coherent project. In other ways, it can be a little jumbled and confused. Paris FC's president, Pierre Ferracci, who has maintained an early 30% stake in the club, and will stay on as president for now at least, providing knowledge and experience of the club and Ligue 2, which he hopes to impart upon the Arnauts and Red Bull, made domestic ownership a key pillar of his willingness to sell the club, reportedly telling intermediaries tasked with looking for a buyer to rule out any overseas, state, or multi-club ownership investors. That might seem admirable, given reported interest in Paris FC from both the Saudi and the Emirati states, in addition to Bain Capital, the American private equity firm that also owns Serie A side Atalanta. But then again, this is the same Pierre Ferracci who sold a 20% stake in the club to the Kingdom of Bahrain in 2020. How does that stack up with the 72-year-old supposed opposition to foreign and state ownership in French football? Likewise, at his first press conference, Bernard Arnault stated that Paris FC didn't intend to change the landscape of French football, whilst also outlining his grand ambitions, which included qualifying for the Champions League and one day playing and beating his beloved Liverpool, which, some might argue, would constitute changing the landscape of French football. At the same time, he also described reports that Agache would invest an initial €100 million in Paris FC, rising to €200 million following promotion to Ligue 1, as being in the right ballpark. He also stated his family's aim at Paris FC was to build the best training centre and academy in all of France. PSG only recently inaugurated a new training centre, known as Campus PSG, which cost them a reported €350 million. There are certainly one or two contradictions there then, although it seems prudent for Arnault and Paris FC to downplay how much money they are willing to spend so as to avoid being taken for a ride and hit with inflated asking prices in negotiations, as is so often the case with clubs who suddenly stumble upon immense newfound wealth. In a sense, the Arnault family's investment in Paris FC has come at a poor time. 14 years into their ownership of PSG, the Qataris appear to have finally learnt from the error of their ways when it comes to overlooking the immense talent that surrounds them. While the club is still spending unlike almost anyone else in world football, the big names like Messi, Neymar and Mbappe have all departed in recent years, and the likes of Bradley Barcola, Desiree Doué and academy graduate Warren Zaire-Emery are considered to be the future of the club. The emphasis on campus PSG and youth development also hints at a change of tact at the Parc des Princes, where PSG have switched from the Galacticos model of the early 2000s at Real Madrid to Bayern Munich's strategy of maintaining a brilliant academy and a strong German core, sustained by signing, in Bayern's case, the Bundesliga's, and in PSG's Ligue 1's, most talented players season upon season. There are other challenges which face the Arnault and Red Bull projects at Paris FC, including a distinct lack of support. Last season, the club averaged just 5,554 fans at their home games, and even that was an increase on 4,030 the previous season. For 8 whole years, between 2006 and 2014, while competing in France's third-tier Championnat National, Paris FC's seasonal average attendance dropped as low as 294 and never climbed above 541. What do they think they are? A Saudi Pro League club? There has been an uptick this season, with crowds at the 20,000 capacity Stade Sébastien Charletti in Paris's 13th arrondissement climbing to 9,069 so far this season, partly due to excitement surrounding the takeover of the club, but primarily because all tickets at the Stade Charletti for men's and women's games have been free since November 2023. You didn't mishear me there. Paris FC tickets are free, which is a fantastic initiative, of course, but the fact that the combination of free tickets, a promotion push, and the arrival of the richest private ownership regime in all of world football still can't push attendances above 10,000 on a consistent basis, or half of the Stade Charletti's capacity, ought to be a cause for concern. Club president Pierre Ferracci's view is that the cause of the problem is the club stadium. The Stade Charletti is a council-owned multipurpose arena that was built during the 1930s for Paris University's various sports teams. It features a large running track which, well, if you've ever been to a football stadium with a running track, you'll know why that is a problem, and no corporate or hospitality facilities which, for a football club now owned by the 5th richest person in the world, who amassed his fortune through the sale of luxury goods, is suboptimal. Ferracci, presumably backed by Arnault, wants to move Paris FC to the Stade Jean Bouin, which is located in Paris's 16th arrondissement, right on the doorstep of the Parc des Princes. And when I say right on the doorstep, they are literally 20 metres apart, located on opposite sides of the same street. It would turn the Paris derby, which isn't really a thing at this point, but Paris FC's owners hope to make it one, into the second closest rivalry in terms of the distance between stadiums in all of world football. The Stade Jean Bouin has a capacity of 19,904, which Paris FC would still struggle to fill, but it was majorly renovated in 2011, now boasting plush corporate and hospitality facilities. There is no running track, meaning that fans are much closer to the action, and it is also, somewhat conspicuously, located in the same park as the Foundation Louis Vuitton Art Museum. Long term, Paris FC see themselves playing in a 40,000 plus capacity stadium. The other option is renovating or even rebuilding Charletti, which might mean moving to the Stade Jean Bouin regardless, until that work is completed. There is even the somewhat amusing possibility, given the history of the two clubs and the ongoing dispute between PSG and Paris City Council, that Paris FC could one day return to the Parc des Princes following a more than 50-year absence. PSG wants to acquire and renovate the Parc des Princes, but Paris Council is flat out refusing to sell the ground. it is an increasingly bitter dispute which some onlookers have described as being unsolvable. A stadium move which symbolised Paris becoming a one-club city at the start of the 1970s, therefore, could, theoretically, be reversed equally symbolically in the 2020s. Antoine Arnault has described his family's involvement with Paris FC as a long-term one, in which there will be, quote, no negative pressure upon the club to achieve instant results. Both Bernard and Antoine will be keen to avoid the pitfalls that Jean-Luc Lagardère fell into during the 1980s by trying to move too fast, spending too much, and focusing too heavily upon star power rather than a sustainable project. As well as the vast data and scouting networks developed by Red Bull which they can call upon, Paris FC can also rely upon the wisdom of Red Bull's new head of global soccer, Jurgen Klopp, who began his new job to the outrage of many Germans last month. Antoine has described himself as being in frequent dialogue with Klopp, who one imagines him being slightly in awe of, given his admiration for Liverpool and the job that Klopp did there, and how frequently he invokes Liverpool as a model. Antoine doesn't just want to replicate the job of FSG in terms of financial prudence and success, but also the centuries-long work that Liverpool have done in creating a concept of themselves as being more than just a club. This is what LVMH does so well. They buy immensely storied and historic brands, with heritage being so important in the luxury goods business. They market and sell themselves as a lifestyle and an image of oneself, rather than merely as handbags or cashmere jumpers, and they attempt to streamline their operations and make them more profitable long term. Paris FC lack the heritage or brand awareness at this stage, which is why Antoine views it as a long-term project, but they are perfectly located and now possess immense wealth and expertise in an environment where almost every French football club, other than Parisian neighbours PSG, are either deep in crisis, on the verge of being in crisis, or have actually already gone bankrupt. The other good news for Arnault and LVMH is that, while inequality in the developed world continues to rise, the sale of luxury goods is only increasing. I know, it's great news, isn't it? That is partly due to efforts, spearheaded by LVMH, to successfully market themselves to the top 10%, rather than just the top 1%, as aspirational status symbols and purchases to be made following significant life landmarks or achievements, like birthdays, weddings, and job promotions, but it's also because the super rich are just getting richer. It perhaps says something about Europe that, while America's richest billionaires amass their fortunes through tech, Europe's richest person and most valuable company hasn't created anything innovative or unique, but merely sells obscenely expensive luxury goods to a vanishingly small but unimaginably wealthy global elite. While Paris FC are keen to market themselves as being quintessentially French and quintessentially Parisian, Bernard Arnault applied for and was denied Belgian citizenship in 2012 in an effort to avoid paying tax in France. Though his bid for citizenship was denied, Arnault successfully relocated 81% of the shares in Arnault's group as of 2019, according to Belgian business newspaper L'Echo, only withdrawing those holdings in 2025. Arnault has also been critical of recent proposals to increase taxes on businesses and implement further regulation in France, praising American President Donald Trump for his billionaire-friendly economic plans. Arnault, the fifth richest person in the world, was one of several billionaires present at Trump's presidential inauguration, along with Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Mark Zuckerberg, the fifth, second, and third richest people in the world, Mukesh Ambani, the 18th richest, Rupert Murdoch, the 85th richest, and Google CEO Sundar Pichai, among a herd of billionaires, which is known collectively in France as a scum of billionaires, collectively worth in excess of $1 trillion, while the incoming American president, who is also a billionaire, rallied the crowd about his passionate opposition to global elites. Yeah, no, I know what you're thinking. Apparently, it is a different type of elite. You know, one that doesn't include all of the richest people in the world or something. Agash Sport, owned by the Arnault family, has acquired a 52.4% stake and Red Bull a 10.6% stake in Paris FC, with Pierre Ferracci, through his holding company Altar Paris, retaining 29.8%, and British Sri Lankan entrepreneur Ali Raja Sabaskaran, through his holding company BRI Sports Holdings, retaining 7.2%. By 2027, it is reported, Agash are expected to have increased their equity in Paris FC to 80% and Red Bull to 15%, with Pierre Ferracci parting with his entire ownership stake and stepping down as president, with Antoine Arnault expected to replace him, though not all of those plans are believed to have been fully finalised just yet. In the short term, Paris FC have the small matter of a Ligue 2 promotion push to contend with. Top of the league when the takeover happened earlier this season, they are second in the Ligue 2 table at the time of this recording, sandwiched between Lorient and Metz, with big games against Pau and Dunkirk coming up over the next couple of weeks. Paris FC's women's team, meanwhile, are already a major force in French football, also currently sat second, but in the Women's Premier League in their case, sandwiched between Lyon and PSG. French football has been something akin to a closed shop ever since the Qataris bought PSG, and Parisian football for about 40 years longer than that. Sure, this might be a battle between Qatari state ownership and a French billionaire who tried to gain Belgian citizenship as a tax exile, allied with an energy drink giant which is widely reviled within football, but at least it might be a battle. And in this context, strange as it may sound, Arnault and Red Bull are the lesser evil. Oh, and if nothing else, it sounds like an amazing Football Manager save, doesn't it? You know, if the game isn't fully dead yet, and is ever actually released. Anyway, that is it for today's video, but thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. I sincerely hope that was the case, obviously. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and it goes without saying, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on not just for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, Alfie Potts Armour, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might enjoy watching after this one. You can also find me on various social media platforms and elsewhere in the world, but, you know, hopefully not in physical form if you are deranged, via all of the links that can be found in the video description below. Thank you very much. Have a magnificent day.